Thank you all for coming. I hope everyone can hear me okay. I'm going to rely on Gail to give me signals if I'm not coming through very clearly, but I'm also going to rely on you all communicating back to me via the chat box. So the room is full. There's lots of people here, so we cannot keep people's audio open because there'll be too much other noise and feedback that comes through. So do take advantage of the chat box as we go through the presentation. The other thing I want to mention is this, I think you're going to find this presentation pretty filled with information. So if you're interested in some technical aspects of bird identification, especially hawk and raptor identification, when we get to that section of the presentation, you might want to have a notepad and pen or pencil to write down some things. Now, Gail is recording this, so there will be an opportunity to go back and recover some of the things that are said. But I know sometimes those processes take a little extra effort and we lose track. So go ahead and have a pen and pencil nearby if you want to keep track of some information. With that, I'm going to start sharing my screen with you, and hopefully everything will go fine with that. Sometimes we're never sure. Okay. Yeah. Now you should, Gail, you see me looking
at me? Yes, we do. It worked.
Okay, very good. And I'm in presentation view here. Now I will say, yesterday I gave a presentation on backyard birds, and I was getting a message as I was doing it. It came several times that my internet was somehow being disrupted, but it would resolve itself. So if I pause or something, you might know that I paused myself waiting for this internet to catch up, something like that. So, but we'll try to recover it. And that's pretty atypical. So often that doesn't happen at all, and maybe it won't happen tonight. So my name is Steve Hale, and I have a small business called Open World Explorers, where I do natural history talks about many of my adventures and passions, one of which is birding and ornithology. I have a doctorate degree from the University of New Hampshire in forest ecology and ornithology, and I've been giving presentations about some of the things I've learned to share it. I do work full-time at the University of New Hampshire in a science and engineering education center called the Leitzel Center at the University of New Hampshire. Do teacher professional development programs, and just trying to get young people involved in science, engineering, and math. So that's what I do full-time. And then I have this hobby job, Open World Explorers, where I come visit with folks like you. We talk about birds for an hour or more. But I also I guide birding trips if anyone's interested in improving your bird ID skills, either maybe birding by ear, something like that. You can get contact information for me here at openworldexplorers.com. Okay, with that, we'll proceed on. One of the first part of this presentation is about hawk watching and how people can get involved with hawk watching. The second part of the presentation is more about identifying hawks in flight. Now, many of you probably have field guides, and many field guides, they typically feature how to identify the perched hawk. We're going to focus on how to identify hawks in flight by some of their shapes and behavioral features and things like that. But first, let's talk about hawk watching. I want to bring your attention to this web resource called hawkcount.org. Okay, and they are kind of a clearinghouse of information on hawk watching around the country and even outside of the country, even in Mexico and other places. So when you go onto hawkcount.org, over here on the left, there's some places you can click for data entry. This is for people who are certified or registered hawk watchers, and we'll talk about them a little bit. But if you want to find a hawk watch near you, you can click this link right here, find a hawk watch. I'm going to show you what that's going to look like also. But also, what's really fun is you can get data summaries, either monthly or daily, and we're going to dive into that a little bit also. But if there are any teachers in the presentation here or homeschoolers, homeschool parents or things like that, if you're looking for some project work to engage your students with, here's some data sets that students can use, okay? When you click on that Find a Hawk Watch link, it will take you to a map of North America, and you can click on different states and provinces in Canada. Here's an example of what you get when you click on New Hampshire. Here are all of the Hawkwatch sites that are registered with hawkwatch.org, okay? And here's the site name, and I have these yellow lines drawn for ones that might be particularly interesting to people in the Keene area. First of all, there's one called Pitcher Mountain, okay? They submitted data. Here's the last time they submitted data, was in April of 2020. So that's relatively active, but they haven't submitted any data recently. But I really want to bring your attention to Pac-Monadnock because they're submitting data daily. It's a great resource. That is an active hawk watching site. So after this presentation, if you're motivated to participate in a hawk watch, I'll tell you what that's a little bit, what that's like. Pac-Monadnock would be the place to go. Okay, so at the summit of Pac-Monadnock, there are volunteers, and there's one person each day who's in charge of the count, and that person is supported by some other volunteers, but other observers, people who are not very experienced or not experienced at all, who just want to know what's going on, can go up there. You can eavesdrop on the conversations that are going on. You can listen to the people call out the birds and things, and then you get to look, you can look at them too. I do recommend you bring your own equipment. We have to remember we are in this special period of time dealing with the COVID pandemic. So people are not inclined to share scopes and binoculars and things like that. So do be prepared to have your own stuff. Be prepared to social distance, but be prepared to listen because you will learn a lot while you're there. And then you'll be more familiar with coming back, to come back. So there are these other sites around, but you can see in New Hampshire, there are a few here. Interlakes Elementary School has some activity where they're reporting on hawks, and up in Concord, and Carter Hill Observatory in Concord as well. So there are some other opportunities. Okay, this is a site, what you might find when you go to a hawk watch. Typically you're up on an elevated mountain or usually it's not forested, it's cleared, so you have good views of the north sky. If it's a spring migration site, you're going to have views of the south sky as birds are coming from the south. This time of year is the fall migration, so birds are flying north to south. But you'll see people with spotting scopes and binoculars. Other things you will typically want to have, you can see it in the foreground of this picture, that's a chair. Sometimes it gets slow at a hawk watch, and standing around for hours waiting for them can be tedious. So you might be sitting in your chair, you bring a lunch, you bring drinks, you bring sunscreen, and your field guides, because you can always study the birds, and you may have 15 minutes earlier seen a bird, and then there's a slow period for you to watch them. So it's not always busy, but we're going to talk about some busy times also. This is the observation deck at the Carter Hill Observatory in Concord, where the platform gets you a little higher than some of the surrounding vegetation. It may be that it's a great site for hawks, but the landowners around might have vegetation that precludes you from seeing from a certain vantage point. So some hawk watching sites will have elevated decks. It also keeps you out of the grass because it might be wet grass, and then your feet get all wet, which can be uncomfortable for a while. And it also could make the site less attractive or muddy for whoever does own the site. So this helps manage the site. Now, I have not been out on a hawk watch yet this year. I can imagine with the COVID pandemic, there are limits to the number of people that are able to utilize the decks. And those are probably restricted to the main, the lead observer and some of the other observers. But for example, you could easily still have a great experience sitting down here with a chair and listening to the people up top. You'd be able to communicate with them as well, okay? An interesting tool that is used is this thing. And this takes a little explanation, but this is kind of like the sight of a gun. And down here at the bottom are landmarks that are listed. So one you can probably read from your screen is this says Moosilauke, okay, for Mount Moosilauke. If you're familiar with the White Mountains, you've heard of that. Franklin Tower is listed here. Mount Lafayette is listed here, Mount Cardigan, things. As you rotate this site, it points to these features. So when you're at the hawk watching site, you need to also be familiar with what the distant features are, because when somebody sees a hawk, let's give an exciting example. Let's somebody says, I got a golden eagle. Everybody says, where? Where do you see it? Well, this is a bearing tool that will say towards Moosilauke. Look towards Moosilauke. That way you're not looking way off to the left. Everybody can have a reference on which way to look in the sky in order to locate the bird. So it is important when you go to a hawk watching site, if there is some communication going on, to identify the landmarks on the horizon. And even if, let's say you and I just go out together to a mountain that we're not really familiar with, we might come up with a system that is just that real pointy mountain on the left, and maybe there's another real pointy mountain on the right, and we use that as a reference so that we can get on, and get on means view the same bird at the same time, and then as we're watching it together, we can start calling out field marks or behaviors that we see together, and things like that. So this is a very useful tool for communicating and getting the direction so we're all looking together. Okay. Now, you guys are very close to Packmanadnock, and I do recommend you visit Packmanadnock for a hawk count. So for this presentation, I pulled up some data as examples from Packmanadnock. This is data from yesterday, September 23rd. That was yesterday, right? Yeah. September 23rd. So the data is presented in how many birds were seen on that day in the first column. There were 31 hawks seen on the first day. And notice vultures are included. So we use the term hawk broadly here. Eagles are also included, even though eagles are different than hawks and things. Hawk watching is a generic term. but there were no migrating vultures observed. They may have seen vultures, and they probably did, but they weren't definitively migrating, so they weren't counted, okay? But there was one osprey, 2 bald eagles, a northern harrier. I won't name them all, but it looks like sharp-shinned hawk was the kind of the big bird of the day in terms of movement. But now look over here. This, if you add up all the days in September, the counts, you will get this month total. So this is an ongoing total of all the days in the month of September. And look here, 8,569. The count officially begins on the first day of September. So there would have been 23 days of counting. There's a total of 9,688 birds recorded. Most of those are broad-winged hawks, okay, 8,569. And then the season total is in the next column. When we click over to October, the month of October, this will reset. This resets every day to zeros until we get new count. This month total will reset to 0, and then we will continue with the cumulative count for the entire season, which is for the fall. Okay, so that's why these numbers are the same as those. So you can see some numbers from Packmanadnock if you had gone up there 2 days ago. If you go onto that website I told you, if you're interested, hawkcount.org, you can get the daily count every day. You can also have it emailed to you. Okay. So that's what's happening recently on Packmanadnock. Here's a summary. I got this off of hawkcount.org. This is where, for people, if you're a teacher or an instructor, you can teach some valuable skills to students. You can copy and paste these numbers and put them into an Excel spreadsheet and look at the daily numbers. This is for all the hawks, okay? And the name is given at the top. So black vulture. So far this year, we haven't had any black vultures recorded at Packmanadnock. And black vulture is a rare, uncommon. It's increasingly becoming more, I should say it's becoming less rare, not becoming more common. It's becoming less rare. Turkey vulture, there's been a few of those. And here's the daily count of the broad-winged hawks, okay? And you can see these big numbers, how they could sum to 8,000. Red-tailed hawks are now only recently on the move, starting to move. And you can see they're sharp-shinned hawks. There are some low numbers, but those numbers are now picking up into the double digits. And here we had a triple-digit day on September 20th, okay? So this is a good way to digest this data. And I'm going to show you a graph in a minute that will be, I think will be interesting for you as well. But hawkcount.org keeps this data online, so we could go back even in 2019, 2018, 2017, and get this data. And these data are used. This is how we understand whether hawk populations are increasing or decreasing, because we look at these years of data. If you look at it over a long time, you can get a trend on whether numbers are increasing or decreasing. So hawk watching is not just a fun activity for learning how to identify the birds. It has a lot of value for understanding the status of the birds in our region. Okay, so broad-winged hawk, this is the bird that had those huge numbers, 8,000, upward of 8,000. So I've got some data here that I got from hawkcount.org. This is for Packmanadnock, practically in the backyard of the Keene library, but in the backyards for many of you. The blue line is 2020, okay? So if we look, there's not many, and then boom, there was 1,000 on September 11th, okay? But then it went down again and it bounced up. And then look at this spike over 2 days. It went up to 2,200 and then up to almost 3,000 on May 18th. And I can't remember who, maybe it was Edith, was talking about being, was it Edith? Nod your head. Were you on Pac-Man-Adnock last week? No, somebody else was on Pac-Man-Adnock last week. And actually I realized, I'm sorry, I just now got my chat box open. Heidi was on Pac-Man-Adnock last Sunday and did not know anything. Oh, yeah, but somebody also reported the kettle. That was Edith. Yeah. So this, Edith, you were seeing part of this flight of birds. So broad-winged hawks migrate socially, that is in groups. And I'm going to show you a photo of that in a little while of what a group of migrating broad-winged hawks looks like. But you can imagine if there were 3,000 birds observed on this single day, when I say 3,000, almost 3,000 broad-winged hawks, these counts are conducted from, I think, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. That's several hundred broad-winged hawks per hour. Imagine what that must look like passing by the mountain, a conveyor almost of these groups of hundreds of broad-winged hawks at a time. So it truly is a spectacle that if you time it right, it's a show worth seeing. Now, what I did here is I overlaid the data, and from 2019, there was a similar spike on the exact same day. So in the last 2 years, the peak broad-winged hawk migration was on September 18th. I tell you that because if you want to catch it next year, you got to write it down or put it on your calendar so you get an alert to get up there around this time. But note, in 2018, note where the peak happened then. It happened a week later, around the 24th. It would be exact, this day last year is when the peak came through. But once the birds go through with their peak, they're done. They're gone. They're headed south. Okay, for the people in the southern parts of the U.S. to see them. So that's a really interesting thing about hawk migration, and it's quite a spectacle. I try to time this to go see it, and I rarely get it right, but maybe you'll have more luck. Okay, now, so that's an introduction to hawk watches, and I'm going to pull my chat box up. We're going to move now into looking at all the different hawks and some tips on how to identify them. But before I do that, if you have any questions about what I just presented on hawk watching in that process, go ahead and type them in your type in your chat box if you have any questions at this time. If not, I'll just wait a few seconds, and if nothing pops up, we'll just move on, and that will be fine too. Okay, so I don't see any questions popping up. I know it takes a little while to type, but I think we're good to move forward. So here in this slide, that before we wade into the species accounts, one thing that's important to do when you're bird watching or hawk watching is it's important to know what are your possibilities. And when you go to a hawk watch, often you'll have a list of all the raptors that are your possibilities. And some of these can be put into groupings, and it's effective to learn them by groupings. So there's a little bit of vocabulary here that we're going to go through, but there are essentially 7 types, and 3 of those types are represented by only one species. You might remember in the data set that I showed you, there were 2 vultures, the black vulture and the turkey vulture. The black vulture is so rare that I don't really even include it in this presentation. It is a possibility, and sometimes there are vagrant migrant birds that can come through, and there are a few others that come late in early winter, but we're going to focus on these. The first one is this group of accipiters, and we're going to talk about that. But The word accipiter, if you say, well, that's a funny word, where does that come from? If you look in your field guide to birds, actually, I'm gonna hit this question real quick. How fast are the hawks moving? If I missed a large group on, say, Pac-Monadnock, could I see them the next day on Wachusett? Good question, but probably not. They're moving about 200, probably 250 miles a day. So good question, and maybe more depending on the weather and the wind. But if you missed them today, you might find them down in Pennsylvania. You might be able to see them in Pennsylvania tomorrow. Okay. If you pull out your field guide, which is a trusty companion for identifying birds, you'll notice that there's 3 species that are in the genus Accipiter. The genus Accipiter. So now I'll take you back to your high school biology days. You might remember memorizing kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. These are the taxonomic categories that all organisms are put into. And if they share one of those names, it means they have some degree of relatedness. Well, at the genus level, they're very closely related. And we have 3 species of accipiters. We have 3 species of bootios. So buteo is another genus. Here we have 2 species of eagles. Now we're not using that genus name anymore. 1 osprey, 3 falcons, 1 harrier, and we'll talk about 1 vulture. Okay. Hazel reports seeing a golden eagle chasing a bald eagle along the Connecticut River last week. That's truly exciting. Okay. Tom has a question. How much longer? Can you clarify that question, Tom? How much longer for what? For the migration. Good question. So migration will continue until November. And the hawk count on Pac-Monadnock will continue until the end of October. So they'll be up there. And even when we get those cold, drizzly rains and sometimes snow flurries that will be coming, they'll be up there. Usually, if the visibility is shut down to 0, then they will cancel the count that day. They won't count if weather is very poor. But otherwise, they'll be up there counting. Good question. While we saw the broadwing hawk peak last week, there are other birds that are just now starting to peak. But I want to say that none of these other birds we're going to talk about peak in the numbers even comparable to what broadwing hawks do. That is a real special case and a real show worth seeing on its own. Okay, so now let's get into these different species, and we'll talk about identifying them when you go out on a hawk watch, or even if you're sitting on your own patio deck and one of these guys flies over. Okay, now, if you haven't been birding, some of these differences I'm going to describe are going to be subtle, and maybe you won't even appreciate them. It does take experience. There's no substitute for field experience. Hawk watching and hawk identification of birds in flight is really an intermediate to advanced level birding skill set. So it takes time, it takes patience. The other thing I'll say is nobody, not even the best birders, can identify every bird. You'll notice in that list, there was unknown raptor, unknown accipiter, unknown buteo. They also record, if they can't identify it, they'll record it and put it into a category that it was unidentified. So it is common to be able to miss or to not be able to resolve what bird it is. Okay, here are the general characteristics of the group, the accipiters. One second. They're stocky winged, okay? Stocky winged. That means they're short but broad. Short but broad wings on the accipiters, and they are long-tailed. So if you made a rectangle around this, it would be a pretty deep rectangle compared to many of the other hawks. Okay, it'd be a pretty deep rectangle. The wings are broad and relatively short. Okay, different accipiters have will be different, and we're going to talk about them. But in comparison to the others, that's what you look for. Accipiters' flight is also characteristic. They flap, flap, glide, or flap, 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 glide, flap, flap, glide. So there's lots of flapping, then lots of gliding, lots of flapping again, and lots of gliding. These other, the bootios and eagles, which they're more soaring, they tend to try not to flap much at all. They can go many minutes without flapping. So, okay. The bootios are long-winged versus stocky-winged accipiters, very broad-tailed. Now, these birds can also splay their tail, and it looks long. So a key to hawk watching is don't feel like you need to identify that bird in 5 seconds. This isn't Family Feud where you have to hit the buzzer and ring in before everybody else, or Jeopardy. Take it in, let the bird present itself in all its different ways. You get different looks in different light. You want to see underneath, you want to see above, you want to see whether it flap, flap glides or whether it's going to just soar up there. Take all of that in before you try to make your identification. So stocky-winged, long-winged, broad-tailed, and long-tailed. These guys often hold their tails long and narrow, tucked in, folded. Eagles, very long-winged, okay, very exceptionally long-winged. Also, large wing slots. You can see a lot of air in between these separate feathers. In fact, if this bird is pretty close, you should almost be able to count the feathers as if they're fingers on an eagle. Okay. The eagles are dark-bodied. They can have some light colors splashed in there, but compared to these other groups, the eagles are dark-bodied. Now, there are just a little quick technical exception. Many of the bootios come in what are called light forms and dark forms. So you can have dark-bodied bootios, but if you use these other characteristics, you'll be able to sort that out. But again, that's kind of an advanced topic and would take some experience. Okay. After the eagles, the other group are the falcons. Pointed wings, characteristic pointed wings. They are also long-tailed, but compared to this other long-tailed bird, which has stocky wings, these guys have narrow pointed wings. Okay, so those were the falcons as groups. Now we're going to look within those groups. So you might remember from the introductory slide, there are 3 species of accipiters. Okay. First one we're going to work with is the sharp-shinned hawk. It's probably the most numerous, but it's also one of the least observed or appreciated because it's very small. It's about the size of a jay, a blue jay, a little larger than or larger than a blue jay. Okay, so it's the smallest of the accipiters, those 3 birds. Okay, remember we said stocky, broad wings. The tips tend to be rounded, not pointy, like in the falcons. Remember the falcon was pointy. And it has a squared tail. Notice how when I draw a line from the tip to tip of the outermost tail feathers, very few feathers go past that straight line that I've drawn. So it tends to have a squared tail. More squared than the others. It also, of the accipiters, tends to have a little bit more of a bend. We call this the M. You see how you can form the letter M here, down to the head, up and down, which means its head is kind of tucked into the recess formed by the forearms here. So it gives it a tucked in, its head like it's tucked in below its shoulders. It gives it that appearance. It is also, if you get a view, if you're on Pac-Monadnock, for example, and this guy flies right by you, and you've got your binoculars on it, if the eye looks big relative to the head, it points to that it could be a sharp-shinned hawk. Because the larger Cooper's hawk, the eye proportionally doesn't take up as much of the head. That's going to be tough to see. That's a special case to be able to see the eye. You can use that characteristic, though, if this bird shows up at your feeder this winter and is harassing your juncos and blue jays and things like that. You want to, that's a good characteristic, is the size of the eye relative to the head. Okay. Here's another view of the sharp-shinned hawk. This is a juvenile. Juveniles have this brown splashing. All the accipiter juveniles have vertical brown streaks. Tips rounded. Splayed tail. Here it's a little more rounded than the other one I showed you. Okay, just a little bit. It's a little more rounded, but the head is tucked. Okay, now we're going to go on to the Cooper's hawk. In size, so there are three accipiters: sharp-shinned, Cooper's, and the northern goshawk. And we're taking them in size. So Sharpie is the smallest, about the size of a jay. Cooper's hawk is the next in size. It's about the size of a crow. Okay. Notice the short, stocky wings. It's longer winged than the sharp-shinned hawk. One thing that requires care. The sharp-shinned hawk and the Cooper's hawk look very, very similar. It's very difficult to tell them. So these points are subtle, and this is kind of an advanced topic to sort them out. But the Cooper's hawk is larger, but male Cooper's hawks are approximately the same size or approach the same size as female sharp-shinned hawks. So using size can be tricky in that area of size where they approach. Now, you might have heard something and said, did he say that right? Yes, the female raptors are larger than the male raptors of the same species. Okay. Wings rounded. Notice when I do the same thing with the tail on the Cooper's hawk, connecting the two outer tail feathers, look how much extends beyond the line now. Significantly more compared to the others. Compared to the sharp-shinned hawk. Okay. Here's another view of the Cooper's hawk. Longer winged. Notice the head does not have the tucked in appearance of shape as the sharp-shinned hawk. He keeps his wings straighter, so his head looks like it sticks out farther. Okay, head looks like it extends farther. That's another good characteristic for Cooper's hawk. Tail is, when he has it folded, it can look kind of squared, but it's still rounded. Okay, extended.
Hey, Steve, there's a couple questions in the chat.
Okay, yeah.
There's one about bald eagles and whiteheads and dark bodied. Is that correct? I mean, it said bald eagles have whiteheads. Are the dark bodied bald eagles with whiteheads?
We're gonna get to bald eagles.
Okay, and then there's one about a Sharpie. If Sharpies migrate, why does Ron see one every winter?
Oh, good question. Because most of these hawks, except for broad-winged hawk, most of these hawks are partial migrants. Some of them migrate, but some do not. There will be small numbers of them that continue to overwinter in our area. We see them and record them on our Christmas bird counts all the time. So good question, Ron. And then
yeah, one more.
yes. Is that true for all raptors? Females are larger. Yes, that's pretty much a rule. In the raptors, females are larger than the males. Good question. Okay, now we're going to go on to the last of our accipiters, the northern goshawk. Oh, let me get this here. Okay. When you do the exercise with the tail, it extends well past the outer two tail feathers, so it has a very rounded tail. And remember, I did this in size. So northern goshawk is very large and actually will look like a bootios, which is the next group we're going to talk about, the bootios. So if you see a weird looking bootios, think that, oh, maybe I have to go through the checklist of characteristics for the northern goshawk. Might be a goshawk. So rounded tail, head extends well past a relatively straight wing. Goshawks are famous for having what we call, hands. They have hands. Do you see how the primary feathers shorten here, and then the outer primaries elongate again, giving it this narrow constricted area? This is more so than in any of the others. So these are called the hands. And this is a good thing to look for in a soaring goshawk. Now the others will have tapered hands, but this is much more accentuated than the other accipiters. Okay, so those are the three accipiters. I'm just going to say them again briefly in order of size. Sharp-shinned hawk, we often call that the Sharpie. You'll hear that at a hawk watch. Somebody will call out Sharpie, Cooper's hawk, and northern goshawk. Now we go into the bootios. These are the long, stocky winged birds that have large splayed tails. They usually do not fold their tails in. They're usually held out. Okay. This is the bird we were talking about, that there were thousands of them that flew through Keene and Peterborough just last weekend. This is the broad-winged hawk. It's the smallest of our bootios. Okay. And some of you have a lot of experience probably with red-tailed hawks because they're so common and around so much. Red-tail is the largest of our bootios, and this is the smallest, the broad-wing. And to the point about migration, broad-winged hawk is not a partial migrant. It is a complete migrant. They are all going to be gone. We do not find broad-winged hawks on our Christmas bird counts. They all go to South America, through Mexico. Okay. So these are small-bodied compared to the other bootios. And I got to get my thing back here. They're very stocky winged. They tend to show some pointed wing tips when they're soaring, more so than the other bootios. Okay. Broad tail, which is characteristic for bootios. And then here's a good one. Here's a big one. When the sun is shining through, they have these square windows. You see these light patches? This is not really, this is where the sunlight is shining through. These feathers are less pigmented, so they appear brighter. Those are called windows. They have square windows. That's a very good way to identify broad-winged hawks when they're illuminated from behind. Okay. In this relatively flat view, this is what kind of the square window that you're seeing here. Broad-winged hawks have this very broad white tail stripe also. All the other hawks have narrow stripes on their tails, if they have stripes at all. And this is what a kettle of a couple hundred migrating broad-winged hawks will look like as it flies by, and you're a hawk watch counter trying to count all of these swirling guys.
Wow.
Through. So that's quite a challenge. And this is, there might have been a few scenes like this last weekend flying across Keene and particularly Pac-Monadnock. Okay. So that was our first Boodio that we have. The other one, this one here, is another small Boodio, and it's not very common, at least in our state. It's more common to the south. This is the red-shouldered hawk. We talked about windows. We'll talk about those more, but rounded wingtips. Windows are crescent shaped. Crescent means half moon. They're half moon shaped. Notice how I can kind of draw this little half moon shape here. Do you see how that's curved? The window extends all the way up onto this primary feather here, all the way up to there, and wraps around. So they're crescent-shaped windows on the red-shouldered hawk. Narrow white tail bands separate this small hawk from broad-winged hawk, which should have a big white tail band. Okay, so again, tips rounded, crescent-shaped windows, narrow tail band. And we go to the last of our Bootios that we're going to cover. This is the most common one, the one that you've seen. It's also a partial migrant. Many of them stay in the wintertime. This is the red-tailed hawk. The tail's not actually red, it's more orangey, but they are very light colored below with a little bit of streaking across the belly. We call that a belly band. And they have this characteristic dark bars that extend from the shoulder to the wrist, called a patagial bar. So they're very large, or very large hawk, largest hawk, dark patagial bars, belly band. All those tell you red-tailed hawk. Also, one thing, they're white-chested. I lost it. I forgot what I was going to say. It'll come to me. Red-tailed hawk. Now, we had some questions about eagles. So, eagles and Bootios can be sometimes hard to identify. And remember, some of these hawks are at a great distance, and identifying them can be a challenge. But as I mentioned in the introduction to the groups, the eagles are all dark-bodied. Okay? Now, not all bald eagles look like the postage stamp bald eagle with the white head and white tail. It takes 5 years for an eagle to reach adulthood when it acquires the postage stamp look of the bald eagle. All of the 4 years prior to that, it is much darker on the wings and has white in different places. Okay, this one, an early bald eagle, doesn't have white on the tail at all. So a lot of times these guys can be misidentified as turkey vultures or other types of hawks. But to key in on it being an eagle, we don't, other than those rare dark morphs of some birds, these birds are dark bodied. The others are kind of more light bodied. Okay? But white in different parts. So eagles are massive birds. And indicators that they're massive when you don't have other birds with them and they're in the sky, their wing beats are relatively slow. Okay. The circles when they're soaring are wide circles. They can't make a short, tight circle like the smaller accipiters and things like that. The dark-bodied, the juvenile eagles, and so here's something you have to remember: white before black. See how as this bird is traveling down the screen, you see white before you see the black primaries. Okay? Remember that. White before black. This is going to help us distinguish the juvenile bald eagles from juvenile golden eagles. Okay? White before black. or even the mature golden eagles. So here's the postage stamp adult bald eagle. Unmistakable when you see them with their plank-like very large wings and straight. And Peter asked, do bald eagles eat loons? And yes, they sure do. They'd love to have a loon if they can get one. Good question, Peter. Wide wing slots on the eagles. Now here is the golden eagle. Remember for the bald eagle, I said white before black. As the golden eagle is traveling, it's dark before light. Not necessarily white, but light. So these underwing coverts, these feathers that cover the base of the flight feathers are called coverts. These are very, very dark. And then it's lighter behind. Bald eagles would be light before black on the juveniles. This juvenile golden eagle has these rather prominent white spots. That is not always the case. Sometimes they lack those. But there's also some white here at the base of the tail that the juvenile bald eagles would lack. White base of the tail and the juvenile. Wide slots again tell you, and massive bird, that these are eagles. Bulging secondary feathers here. So from the end you have primaries, secondaries, and then what are called tertiary feathers in towards the body. But the bulging secondaries come out. So here's another golden eagle, dark before light. That's what you want to look for when you're going to call it eagle. First thing, establish that it's an eagle, and then look for that kind of color pattern if you can get it. If you have a perch bird, you're going to look at the head, and there should be some goldish or yellowish colors on the nape that give the golden eagle its name. Okay. Now, this bird is also very large, and many of you have probably seen osprey. It is the only one that we have, only raptor that we have in our area migrating through that is really completely white below. When you look at this guy from the top of Pacmanadnock, you're going to see a lot of white. And if it's a dark sky and the color of the body isn't reliable, then you're going to look and see, does it, most of the time, is it carrying itself in this exaggerated M? See how I make the letter M out of its wings? With its head is often tucked in below a line extending from wrist to wrist. Okay, so that's the osprey. That's how you tell that one in flight. We call it has crooked wings. If you see the crooked wings, that's a good sign right away for osprey.
Steve,
yes.
I don't know whether you saw these, but Edith, a while back, not too long ago, she asked what color is wing feathers, and I'm not sure what bird she was talking about.
Okay,
And then somebody asked whether bald eagles, are they primarily scavengers?
Well, okay, bald eagles, they do scavenge a lot. Yes, it depends on the circumstance. In the winter, they are certainly primarily scavengers. In some locations, they can subsist primarily on fish and catch fish, a significant amount of them. And Edith asked, what color is wing feathers for the golden eagle? And that was probably before we covered golden eagle. Is that correct, Edith? You have your question answered?
No, I typed in after.
Okay, so you said what color is wing feathers? What was that referring to?
The golden eagle.
The golden eagle.
Okay, is that question answered, or do you still have a question about that?
I think she wants you to repeat it.
Oh, okay. So let me go back to the slide. So this is an adult golden eagle. The wing feathers are blackish gray. They're darker towards the end and silvery whitish towards the base. Okay.
Secondary.
These are the secondaries here, so it's the same.
Okay.
So here we'd have the primaries. Primary feathers are the feathers that are attached to the bony hand, the part of the hand. The secondaries come off of the forearm, and tertiaries come off of the upper arm. But you can see they're all dark towards the end, what we call the distal end, the far end of the feather. And then the closer end towards the base is a more shiny white or gray color. Coverts are all very dark black, which give this contrast. Okay. In the immature, so this was the adult. In the immature, we have a similar situation, but the feathers are more uniform in color, but there's still the distinction. They're a little lighter than the coverts. Okay. In the eagle, there'd be mottling white in here for a juvenile bald eagle. Okay. Now we come to the falcons. Okay. Remember, they have very pointy wings. This guy, the American kestrel, is our smallest falcon. He's about the size of a pigeon. He's very, they are long-tailed. Sometimes they keep that tail straight back like an accipiter, but remember, accipiters have broad, rounded, stocky wings. These guys have long, very pointed wings in the falcons. Okay. Color-wise, the kestrel is orange. It gives a very orange appearance. None of the other falcons or even the other birds are really going to show much of an orange appearance. Notice if this bird's flying over your head and you've got to look at it with, and you have a good view in your binoculars, this black tip to the wing or to the tail hits all of the tail feathers except the outer two. So the tail band is incomplete. Kind of interesting, right? You look at that, you might say, oh, maybe these haven't grown completely. Nope, that's normal. They just don't color the outer two tail feathers. Here's a shot a client of mine took on Mount Blue Job. I love this because the kestrel's looking at you. They have these two mustache stripes on the sides of their head, but here you can see the orange above and the black tail band that we just saw. The males have blue wings, the females have orange wings. So you can actually tell male and female kestrels apart. That's our smallest falcon. We have 3 falcons in the group. That's the first one. This is the second one. This is probably the most challenging of the falcons to identify, the one that takes the most experience. It's very brown overall, just looks brown. It's intermediate in size between the kestrel and the bigger one, which is the peregrine falcon, which we're going to cover next. It looks very stocky. The body is stocky and wide. It looks heavy. That takes some experience seeing that. They're brown above, heavy broad streaks below. Complete black tail band. It's different than the kestrel. Sometimes in size, these two can get close with the kestrel, and that tail band might be a good indicator for you. Okay. Here's another shot of a merlin. See how overall brown colored it is? Okay. Now that can be a challenge because the peregrine falcon can also appear very brown. So paying attention to some other characteristics in the peregrine falcon that we're going to cover next will be important. Complete black tail. Okay. Here's the peregrine. See how he's similarly brown. Okay. So it looks a lot like it, but he's a lot bigger than the merlin. He also carries his wings in a stronger M. And we talked about M before, so you might remember that from the osprey and some of the other birds like The sharp-shinned hawk has his wings in an M. If you get a look at the side of the face on the flying bird, they have this broad marking. We call that a mustache stripe on the side of the face of the peregrine falcon that the prairie falcon does not have. I'm sorry, not prairie, Merlin. No. Prairie falcons are out west. That's a different hawk watch. Okay. Peregrine falcon. Okay, now we're coming close to the end. Okay, this one, now we learned those groups, and osprey is in a group by itself, but I put it up with the eagles to contrast it, because the ospreys are very large. Combined, the two eagles and the osprey are the largest true raptors. Vultures are also very large, but they're not really raptorial birds. This one is large, very long-tailed, very long-winged. This is the northern harrier. Okay. An awesome characteristic that can be seen on these guys is this white rump patch. None of our others, normal ones, in winter sometimes we get rough-legged hawks, and they have a big white rump patch. But this is a good indicator for northern harrier. They also, normally if we were in the library together, I'd be able to hold my wings and you'd be able to see what I was meaning, but they hold their wings in a V above the horizontal, so they're not flat winged like an eagle. They hold their wings elevated in a V. And I'll see if I can show you that. One moment. Having a little difficulty. Okay. Long-winged and long-tailed on the harrier. And we're almost through our list. We almost got them all. Wings can be slotted. Wings in a dihedral. You could confuse this bird on migration with a buteo. But remember, buteos are short-tailed. The wings are going to say buteo, but the tail's going to say harrier. And then the wings held in a V. I'm going to try to pull up this video, a short video clip to show you. Let me see. That may not work. I'm going to stop sharing that for a moment and go here. Nope, that's not going to work. I'm not going to show that video clip. It's not going to work. So I'm going to go back to, oh, no, wait, yeah. Here it is. This is the, can you see this? You see a YouTube video? Okay, good. Notice the bird's got his wings in a V above the horizon, or above his flat plane. Oh, it looks like it's a little choppy. Tell you what, let me stop it there. Go back to here. That part has loaded. Now we'll play. No, okay. We use the word kiting. He kites back and forth, almost like a kite in the wind. And when he glides with his wings up in a V. Look how long his wings are, and look how long he holds his narrow tail. Those are all good characteristics for harrier. And then the last thing I want you to notice, when he turns, you see that white rump patch. It all happens pretty quickly, but when you have good binocular views on them, you get to see that white rump patch. There, did you see it there? Okay, now I'm going to stop sharing that, and we are near the end. Let me screen share, and I want to go back I want to go. See, I'm back there again. And I'm going to get rid of that. I want to get rid of that. Screen sharing is stopped. Share screen and update. And I'm back here. Now I just got to get down to the slide again. We were on Harrier. Okay, that's where we were. Okay, so now the last bird we have to cover is not truly in the raptor family, it's a vulture. This is the most common soaring bird in our skies. Notice it has the similar scheme as the golden eagle with dark before white, dark before white. It also has heavily slotted wings. So this bird can be mistaken for an eagle. It's very large. It's the size of an eagle. It has a lot of characteristics of the golden eagle. But there are several characteristics that are not like the golden eagle. It is very large. The wings are black before white, like the golden eagle. Long wings, long-tailed, wing-slotted. However, the vultures the turkey vultures are in a very strong dihedral. And that, remember, that's the same as the harrier. It's the V. Dihedral means V-shaped. V-shaped wings, the way they hold. Turkey vultures, when they're soaring, they fly like they're drunk. They teeter back and forth. They don't fly in a steady, straight path. All the other birds we've talked about, except the harrier, tends to fly in a steady, straight path. Harrier and vultures fly more similarly to each other. And then the other thing is, if you can get your eyes on it through your binoculars, turkey vultures have a characteristic pink head because it's unfeathered. There are no feathers on the head of a turkey vulture. It's also a tiny head, very small. Okay. So, their soaring is teetering, like I said, almost like they're drunk. So you just got a lot of information, like drinking water through a fire hose, on hawk identification. Some of it is going to be useful to you immediately in terms of identifying birds to whether they're accipiters or bootios. If you went out tomorrow and were able to do that, I would be so impressed. Getting these birds to species, if you haven't had practice, will take a long time, but it's a lot of fun, and it's something to build toward, like any passion or hobby, things like that. So, but if you go, the best thing to do if you want to put this into practice, because remember, we don't really acquire anything that we don't practice. Go to one of those hawk watches. Listen to what the experienced experts there are saying, and you will slowly accumulate these, and your brain will be able to pick up these characteristics and track them. So a lot of stuff tonight, kind of technical, but also there's some things in there to help put you in the right ballpark for the birds. So with that, I'll just mention there's some other presentation titles I have here. If you want to reach me, info@openworldexplorers.com, and I will stop there, and we will look at the chat box for some closing questions and things like that. So Heidi asked, what ID book do you recommend to use at a hawk watch? So I recommend a book by Jeff Ligori. It's Hawks in Flight. It's a photographic guide. I'm going to type in the chat box. Jeffrey Ligori. He has a number of books, and actually, if you wait just one second, I'll be right back. I'm going to grab my book because he has several, and I want to give you the right one. And I got his first name wrong. I got his last name right. It's Jerry Ligori. And the book is Hawks at a Distance. And see if I get my, it's not really showing up on my screen. So I'm going to type that in. Hawks at a Distance. And it has many photos of these birds flying at different angles, and it has fantastic descriptions of the things that I was talking to you about. Thank you, Janice and Colleen. I'm glad you enjoyed the presentation. And Anne asked, what is my favorite field guide? And do you mean specifically for bird watching in general or for hawk watching? Can you clarify that for me? And oh, and it looks like Jacqueline is a teacher, so because she was excited to use some of this in her classroom with her kiddos. Jacqueline, if you're still on and can hear me, feel free to reach out to me for assistance with that. And I'm scrolling down. Let's see. Karen, you're welcome. Yep. Caleb, you're welcome as well. Heidi. Oh, Heidi's gone back to Pac-Monadnock. Good. I think she's ready. Oh, and is both. What is my favorite field guide? So my favorite field guide for general general bird watching is the Sibley field guide by David Allen Sibley. And then my favorite one for hawk watching is the one I showed you. It's Hawks at a Distance. There are some that are even more technical than the presentation I gave you that go into some other details. But personally, I don't hawk watch at really at details more than what I provided to you today. So, but I did give you a lot, so good job. Thank you, Fred. Mary, thank you for your comments, and Tracy. Any of you, if you really enjoyed this presentation and found it valuable, do let the library staff know, because it's always good feedback for them to know how they're serving their audiences. And it's good for me because I'll hear from Gail also how well this presentation was received. So do let her know. And then there's always the possibility we could do another presentation in the future. One thing I try to know is, if you feel like this was too technical, if you want something less technical than what I gave you, if you want something more like last time, which was like bird quizzes and things like that on backyard birds, it's good to have a balance, and there's a lot to learn, but I don't want to get too technical sometimes. Anne, thank you, and thanks for your questions that you had. Diane, thank you as well. Anne says not too technical. Not too technical. This was a perfect pitch. Good. I'm glad you felt that way. If there's no other questions, I think we can all have a good night, and I'm going to encourage you to go out, find an open spot, whether it's Pac-Monadnock or your backyard. There's still a lot of hawk watching season left. You will need binoculars, okay? So if you don't have binoculars, you'll need to find a way to get a hold of those. And I would say you want at least 7 power binoculars, at least 7, somewhere between 7 and 10. But a lot of times people try to use these compact binoculars because a friend gave them to them or something, but they may just end up being more frustrating for you than useful. Anne asked, up to what date do the hawks migrate? Typically, the hawk migration is completed by the end of October. But I'll give you this additional little nugget. While the hawks are done migrating in October, there are hawks that are arriving and spend the winter here. They're not common. Things like rough-legged hawk, as an example, can be arriving to our area, and some will spend the winter. So that's always fun to look for as well. Okay, good. Thank you, Heidi. Thanks for that good feedback. I'm glad you're motivated. If anybody wants to do a birding trip or a hawk watch, let me know. Because of COVID, I'm only running private tours, no group tours. Pitcher Mountain is nearby. Is no one watching there? So Fred, according to the hawkwatch.org site, I think the Pitcher Mountain site is not reliably monitored. It could be that it's monitored on weekends because this is all done by volunteers. So if you go up on a weekday, it might be that there's nobody there. If any of you are interested in getting connected and you don't really know how through the website, feel free to email me and I'll help try to get you connected to the people or to understand what the schedule is at Pitcher Mountain. I'm happy to try to help you do that. If you're motivated to reach out to me, I'll be motivated to try and help you. Okay. Good. All right. Thank you all.